Hi, this is Stuart Slater from Contemporary Graphics. I'd like to talk a little bit today about a project that we recently completed. It was a labor of pride for us here at Contemporary. We had a chance to work along with our friends from Design Army in Washington, D.C., putting together a composite calendar utilizing a variety of different processes: letterpress, foil stamping, embossing, die cutting, and engraving for our good friends at Neenah for the 2012 calendar. Before we get started, though, we always have to take into consideration the substrate. And Neenah Paper's great paper, and it really works wonderfully with all the different processes that we would use, certainly engraving, embossing, foil stamping. But before we do all those things, it's real important to get the design together. And that's a collaborative effort working along with the designer to make sure that we at Contemporary adhere and really work towards achieving their graphic vision. Once that occurs, we start on that pre-press, getting our proofs together, where we have to make sure all our dimensions are correct, and then once that takes place, we move right into die making. Die making is an art form in itself, and in this particular case, we used not only letterpress dies, but foil stamping dies and engraving dies. We utilized our CAD machine to make sure our dimensions are great and make sure that everything was as precise as possible, certainly when we were using the folding board that was necessary for the carrier. The dies themselves were made of copper and then etched to make sure that they would have a long-lasting use. Once that takes place, we then look and make sure everything's cross-referenced to make sure that all is in proper sequence and in order. Those dies are photoelectronically made, and the treatment of using electroplating for chroming the copper is very important. As you can see, we have a variety of different dies that were used, and making sure that the registration was correct was an important process. After the dies are made, they get placed into the press for the engraving. Engraving presses use not only the dies that you see here, but they also correspond to a counter, which is a handmade cut die, which also is all about the craftsmanship involved, because that's all done by hand, as well as the actual printing. If you look, you can see that these are hand-fed into a jig with pressure on both sides, which allows the ink to fill the etched areas of the die. They're then placed onto the wheel for drying, as that process dries relatively quickly and can be done as the paper goes through the wheel. You're looking at various dies. These are foil stamping dies, and you can also see the images, the reverse images, or the bruising, as some would say, that occurs from the foiling process on the reverse side of the sheet, but also the engraving process. Sometimes the bruising will be considered a part of the elegance of engraving or letterpress. And that's some waste foil that was being used in the project. Now you're looking at the outside carrier, and with that you can see the foil stamping, registration, a die that goes along with it, and of course the bindery. Let's not forget that these all have to be collated, and this process is done by hand and with much detail. And of course it all comes down to the very end when you see all the processes being used: letterpress, engraving, foil stamping, die cutting, assembly, and it all goes together to form a product which we think our friends at Neenah will be very proud of, as we are certainly here at Contemporary.